reached the comic relief section of the show. Just a little background. Murdered Avedon Hill is a murder mystery that's set in a fantasy world. There is magic and monsters. Music plays an important part in the world, but the book just came out, but there was a podcast version, audio version that ran from 2007, 2009. We had about 20,000 listeners at the height of the podcast. There was a lot of production that went into it, a lot of music, a lot of sound effects, and because of that, we had not the most consistent release schedule that our fans were used to. And you will hear why when Kim comes up to sing. So I'm going to read a little section from the book that touches upon how music is important to the world. The Song of Artus. The battle drums never played as loud as they did at Ulm the next morning. Alicia Llewellyn's song had given them hope, a powerful magic indeed. From Tales of the Children. Aramis was silent for most of the return trip, letting his horse follow Constable Lewis without too much direction. Aaron rode by his mentor's side, carefully watching his actions. Aramis spent most of his time studying the pendant he had taken from the merchant's neck. Aaron couldn't quite make out what it was, but it appeared to be some sort of religious symbol. Finally, Aramis broke his concentration. He dangled the pendant so that Aaron could see it better. The symbol was 3 swords set in a circle of silver. The middle sword was surrounded by flames. "Do you know what this is?" Aaron replied, "It's a symbol I've seen before, but I can't recall from where." Aaron thought back to Aramis's lectures about the children of Aj. "Is that a symbol of Artus?" Aramis smiled. "Very good. For an immortal that most people have forgotten, we sure have seen a lot of references to him lately." "Yes, there are those who still worship Artus, at least in secret. But they are usually men of war, not booksellers." Aaron rode forward, pulling Aramis's mount along until the 3 men rode side by side with Aaron in the middle. "So, head constable, Aramis has been teaching me lately about the children of Aj. Do you believe there is a god named Artus?" Lewis didn't appear comfortable with the conversation, and seemed less comfortable still about being drawn into it. But the look in Aramis's eyes prompted him to answer. "Aaron, I'm no scholar. I was raised in a town similar to Avedon Hill, where most citizens once held great regard for Artus and his works. By the time I became an adult, our temple to Artus has been rededicated to Iberian. And when I came to Avedon Hill, the temple to Artus was no longer being used, and it was years before Father George was able to get a new temple built for the worship of Aj. Now, we live in a generation that barely knows who Artus was or is." Aramis contemplated Lewis's words. He smiled, once again forced to reevaluate his opinion of the man. "But what do you believe, Constable?" Lewis still directed his words towards the student. "Aaron, have you ever heard of the story of the Song of Artus?" Aramis's smile broadened. "The Song of Artus. Good." Aaron shook his head, and Lewis began telling the story. "Thoroic Ironblade was a human general who destroyed the demon army at the city of Ulm during the War of Man." Aaron interrupted. "With the help of Queen Alicia and Iberian, right?" "Yes, but it was Thoroic's army that had delayed the demons for nearly 5 years. Thousands of men had died just to make that final battle at Ulm possible. Thoroic understood from the beginning that the demons weren't just slipping into this world. They were organized and bent on the destruction of Cairn. It was Thoroic's actions, his honor, his perseverance against all odds, that made Alicia Llewellyn recognize Thoroic's true nature." Aaron remained skeptical. That Thoroic was an incarnation of Artus? Lewis nodded. "It is said her presence on the battlefield, outside the walls of Ulm, caused Thoroic to realize his deific nature. And with that understanding came power, which ultimately allowed them to win the battle that day." Aaron turned to Aramis. "His epiphany. Why would the Elf Queen's presence unlock Thoroic's memories and power?" Aramis responded, because some say that Queen Alicia Llewellyn was an incarnation of Aruna, the first daughter of Aj. Aaron sighed. Well, that makes all the sense in the world. But what does that have to do with the Song of Artus? Lewis laughed and asked Aramis, where did you find this young man? Aramis smiled. Alas, he has had a sheltered upbringing. I'm doing my best. On the battlefield that night, as corpses were being buried and demon carcasses burned, Queen Alicia started to sing a most inspirational song. At first, she walked amongst the people while they did their work, her voice barely above a whisper. But by the time she had finished, everyone, every man, elf, and dwarf, within the sound of her raised voice, surrounded her, enthralled. Her song praised Thoroc's godlike effort to preserve man against the demon threat, and his victory over the demons on the battlefield that day. Aramis broke in, continuing the story. Thoroc and Iberian were called to the field and stood side by side as Alicia sang her song a second time. But Queen Alicia changed the words as she went through it again. While it still raised the actions of Thoroc to mythological proportions, the elf queen now sang of Artus, godchild of war. He turned to the constable. Do you know some of the song, Lewis? Oh, yes, Sir Aramis. It's one of the only poems I've ever learned. I can sing a little from the second telling, if you like. Aramis nodded, and Lewis sang in a light yet powerful voice. Surrounding Artus, a living shield of man, Taurine legions strove to break in vain. Shed no tears for Artus, Iberian shouted with pride. The wall still holds, he yet lives by our side. With weapons consecrated and with aid arrived before, on the vile Taurine did his fatal sword thrust pour. Then on Vernic and on Verlic did Artus cast his gaze, as he charged down his enemies like a cloud burst by the sun's rays. These and other mighty Karim on the earthly battle slain, by their valor and their virtue walked the bright ethereal plain. They have cast their mortal bodies, crossed the radiant portal of heaven, for to win celestial kingdoms unto mortals it is given. Let them strive by steadfast action, rousing speech, endurance long, brighter life and holier future into sons of men belong. Aramis remained silent while Lewis's singing voice flowed around them. Lewis's belief in Artus and his song was apparent. The power of it brought tears to Aramis's eyes. Aaron was moved as well, turning on his horse to face Aramis with a look of awe. I don't know what to say. Aramis composed himself. Thank you, Lewis. That was exactly what I needed. Lewis seemed to understand. He nodded and pulled his horse back a few paces, allowing Aramis and Aaron to ride ahead of him.